We are stuck in this horrid plane of existence, and you're telling me there's no way to teleport back?
I guess. I mean, this Arcane Circle is pretty old.
You're pretty old.
Well, that's offensive.
Alright, we will have to work together to escape this plane of existence. Are you with me?
It would be nice to spend some time together.
I really hate you.
Hello folks, and welcome to Dice Chatter. My name is Donnie, and today we are building these awesome looking arcane circles. And would you look at that, they are of course modular. Whether you want to show off a creepy necromancer and his magical lair, a demonic summoning waiting to happen in a small town, or just a nice happy sun for a change, these are the arcane circles for you. So enough of me jabbering on about the terrain piece, let's jump right on over to the build. For starters, we need a strong base for both the arcane circle itself and the placeholder it will set into. For the circles, I go with this thin hardboard I had lying around. Each circle will be 2 inches in diameter, and I do my best to cut these out perfectly as I can. So I run out to the garage and whip out the scroll saw and give me a close to perfect cut. I'd imagine scissors would work with a material this thin, but I just didn't want to risk it. For the larger structures that the circles will be placed into, I use some peel and stick vinyl tiles. I will end up making 4 distinct structures that each circle can be placed into, but for the sake of this tutorial, we will touch on 2 of the bases. Make sure when designing these structures, take the arcane circle size into account. You want everything to be the exact same size to create some strong modularity in this build. Now that we have our circles and bases ready, we need to prepare our foam, and for me that requires a lot of time at the Proxon. A number of foam sizes should be popping up on the screen now. For the arcane circles, I generally use the larger squares, and if I want to give off a more messy and ruined vibe, I'll throw in a few other sizes as well. You'll get to see what I'm talking about later in the video, but I want to show you how I tackle a couple of the main arcane structures first. One of these structures will be a set of stone stairs that lead up to a circular platform. This is where we will place any arcane circle we so choose. The stairs are a relatively simple idea. Lay down a larger piece of foam that will be covered up by an appropriate brick size to help reduce the amount of bricks needed for this creation. The other main aspect to think about though is the ability to keep this creation modular. You need to make sure that this circular platform, well, ends up staying circular. I found what worked for me is going slow, placing down 1 layer of bricks at a time and bracing the inside with larger bricks. This will help support each row of foam you lay down as well and create a visual barrier to the inside of the stone structure. And don't forget, when you get near the top, to stop laying down these foam bricks. Your arcane circle needs somewhere to be placed into, and you want it to be nice and flush with the top layer. Also, if you want to add some more details, I cut and glued in 4 wooden posts, drilled holes in the top, and added some thin chains through each hole. Now, this arcane circle can be used for more than just magic and give you, the crafter, the opportunity to add all kinds of interesting ideas to the top of this stone platform. Now, I'd mentioned I'd go through another neat idea I had for these arcane circles, and that is what we will cover now. Just like all of the structures we will create, we need to make it modular and keep the arcane circle size in mind. Once we have those bricks in place, we can go wild. I wanted to create a stone structure that looked as if an earth elemental slammed its fists into the earth and 4 stone pillars shot out of the ground. The only method to my foam madness here is to carve and cut away at some foam and make various sharp and unrecognizable shapes. This is where you can go a little crazy and make all kinds of different formations around the stone circle we laid out a moment ago. I mostly used some hot glue to adhere these foam rocks to the base because I felt like PVA glue would just take too long to dry during this process. Now, I only covered 2 of the 4 foam structures I created, but really you only need to follow one main idea. That being, it needs to fit the arcane circles, which we will cover how we tackled those now. For the circles themselves, I figured we could go in 2 different directions. One circle being a near perfect layout of similar stone squares, and the other being a little bit more ruined and filled with a few different brick sizes. This process is relatively simple and quick to do. I just spread around a bunch of PVA glue and took the time to lay out a number of foam squares we cut out earlier in the video. Also, make sure that if you get any overhang on the circles, to cut it out flush with the circle's edge so that they smoothly fit into place in each stone structure. Once you have created a number of these arcane circles, we need to make them more magical. I took to the Google and searched up a number of simple shapes that we could then print out and create interesting stencils. Obviously, make sure they fit on the circles you create and also adhere these stencils to some cardstock to make them a little bit more rigid. Now, there are a couple ways to use these stencils. One is to cut them out, tape them to your stone circle, and airbrush on some colors. Or the other route is to place them on the circle you have created and then cut out the foam below. I do this tactic with the skull, as you can see here. I just take my time cutting and chipping away at the stones. For the diamond shape, you can also remove the stones entirely and place in other bricks that maybe some other wizard or mage came across and insert it in place to make this arcane circle something of their own. Get creative with this process and come up with a story to tell. Of course, let's not forget the goop step. We mix up play sand, PVA glue, and some water and spread it around each circle and stone structure where we see fit. Any extra sand and pebbles that protrude too much out of the cracks in the stone, we make sure to wipe away with a paper towel. We let this dry and then make sure to give all the foam a coat of some thinned down Mod Podge. This will help protect the foam, give it some rigidity, and of course give something for the primer to stick onto. After all of this dries overnight, we can move right on over to painting. A new day, another cup of coffee, and we can get right back into painting. For the sake of brevity, I'll gloss over priming our terrain black and giving it a light dusting of a white ink for a zenithal highlight. These steps are pretty standard for most of my terrain builds. From there, we grab a brown ink and go over any areas where I feel there's a large amount of dirt and rubble. We spray over these areas and give them a good base coat. Nothing too heavy, just covering up the base level of the build. From here, we can go right into painting up the stones. I go for my usual cheap acrylic paints you can snag up at any hobby store. I start with a dark gray and do a very heavy dry brush. I guess a wet brush or something. Either way, this coat goes on pretty heavy. Also, don't forget to paint out the stone stencil as well. I decided to go with a sandstone color of sorts to give it a different tone to the standard gray stones I use. Right after that, we go over everything again, this time with a black wash. I make sure to get in all the nooks and crannies of the build, but I make sure to quickly dab away any excess left on the surface with a paper towel. I just want to make sure here that the terrain project isn't overly saturated. We let this dry and go back over everything with a light gray dry brush. I hit everything with this paint, the stones, the dirt and soil, even the wooden beams. Don't overload your brush with paint and let the technique do the work. From here, we go back to the airbrush and grime everything up. I grab a few different contrast paints, Skeleton Horde, Militarum Green, and I think Agaros Dunes, and I just go around the build spritzing it in different areas. I find less is more in this step. Pick a spot or two on each separate piece and give it a taste of grime. From here, I get a bit nervous because we will now attempt to airbrush on our stencil. As I go through the steps here on screen, I'll cover what I should have done if I was to do this process again. For starters, I would instead glue stick down the stencil over any of the finer details rather than just only tape down the edges. I found there was a little bit of overspray that muddied up some of the details. And of course, think of each paint job here as a proper paint job. Don't just spray one-click dusting over the stencil. Let the initial coat dry and put down another coat or two to make sure that the stencil shows up on the stone, especially if it is a lighter color. So while I go back to the sun and brighten it up a little bit, don't forget to add in some finishing touches. Make sure to pour some blood and gore into the summoning circle that is waiting to spawn a demon. Or maybe go around to each arcane circle and paint on a few magical runes glowing from the stone. After all of the final details are placed on these arcane ruins, we can call this build complete. There you have it, folks, my take on some modular arcane circles. I really enjoyed this creation, and with a modular build like this, there are so many ways to change and reuse the same terrain for a different encounter. Let me know what you all think of the build, and make sure to hop on over to the Discord to share your own creations. We'd love to see what you all have been working on. Link is in the description. Also, don't forget to do all the other socials, check out the Patreon if you'd like to support my work financially, comment, like, and subscribe. Until next time, folks, I want to thank you all for watching, and of course, happy gaming.